welcome to The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. First, the headlines. Russian forces bombard several Ukrainian cities, including Lviv in the west. 7 people dead after 4 rockets hit military facilities.
South Africa military deploys more than 10,000 troops to help relief and rescue operations following devastating floods in part of KwaZulu-Natal province.
Plus, thousands of Jewish worshippers pray at the Western Wall today at special priestly blessing under heavy Israeli security following recent violence in Jerusalem.
Hey, thanks for joining us this Easter Monday. Russian forces have carried out missile attacks in parts of southern and western Ukraine, including in the city of Lviv, where authorities reported at least 6 people died. The bombardment came as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that Russia was preparing to finish off the entire region of Donbass after failing to break through in the north and seize the capital, Kyiv.
According to Zelensky in a statement on Sunday evening, Russian troops are preparing for an offensive in the east. They want to literally finish off and destroy Donbass. Meanwhile, in the strategic southeastern city of Mariupol, Ukrainian forces inside the encircled Azovstal steel plant on Sunday ignored a Russian ultimatum to lay down their weapons. The capture of the port city is of critical importance as it would allow Russia to forge a land corridor between the Donbass and the already annexed Crimea region.
But seizing Mariupol has been a challenge despite coming under weeks of heavy bombardments. Ukrainians have repeatedly pledged to continue fighting and to defend the city until the end. And while focusing on the east, Russia has not stopped shelling other parts of Ukraine. Here's more on today's events.
6 people have been killed and 8 others wounded in a missile strike on the western Ukrainian city of Lviv today. The regional governor, Maxim Kozetsky, said 3 missiles hit military infrastructure facilities, while 1 struck a car tire replacement facility. Emergency teams rushed to the site to extinguish the fire. Separately, authorities said some of the missiles hit areas close to a railway station and other railroad facilities, briefly disrupting normal traffic. Russia invaded Ukraine on February the 24th and calls its action a special military operation to demilitarize Ukraine and eradicate what it calls dangerous nationalists. The West and Kyiv accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of unprovoked aggression. Russian news agency RIA Novosti published a Sunday drone footage of Azovstal steelworks in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol. A plume of smoke was seen above the plant where Ukrainian fighters remained on Sunday, despite a Russian ultimatum to surrender. The agency also showed aerial images of Mariupol's commercial harbor, of which Russia claimed it had almost taken full control. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal says troops in the pulverized port of Mariupol were still fighting on Sunday.
They will fight till the end, and as for now, they still are in Mariupol.
Over in Sumy, the last of the Russian forces finally pulled out around only a week ago, leaving a trail of destruction in several towns across the region. But Sumy's territorial defense, the partisan militia that stayed behind to fight, is preparing for a new onslaught of assault. Sumy locals have grown up hearing tales of valiant partisan movements dating back to the Second World War, and the most recent incursion has only reinforced pride in the tradition. According to local territorial defense members, the volunteer militia numbers over 1,000, but membership is growing. Although there are now some Ukrainian military installments in Sumy, locals will not give any numbers.
We don't want to see any invasion in Ukraine, and I don't want to be here. I'm rather creating some new things and stuff rather than standing with the rifle. So this is my position, but when there is no other choice, I will stay in.
Moscow has since launched more long-range attacks, hitting targets in Kyiv and other major cities, following the sinking of its Black Sea Fleet's flagship. The attacks followed Russia's announcement on Friday that it would intensify long-range strikes in retaliation for unspecified acts of sabotage and terrorism, hours after it confirmed the sinking of its Black Sea flagship, the Moskva. Kyiv and Washington say the ship whose sinking has become a symbol of Ukrainian defense was hit by Ukrainian missiles. Moscow says it sank after a fire and its crew of around 500 were evacuated. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has accused Ukraine of constantly changing its stance on issues that have already been agreed at peace talks. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters on a conference call that while high-level talks continue, the Ukrainian side had not been consistent in their approach. The Kremlin also said there was still time for so-called unfriendly countries to switch to payments for gas in rubles. Peskov declined to say how many countries have so far agreed to do so.
The VOA's Anna Chernikova joins us now. She's in Lviv in Ukraine. Anna, great to see you. And we know that there have been reports of, those attacks in Kyiv and Lviv, especially over the weekend and even this morning. Could you tell us more about them?
Hello. Yes, this is true. We experienced a lot of new attacks, unfortunately, actually almost in every region of Ukraine. So if you look at the map, Kyiv was bombed, Lviv was bombed, Kharkiv, Mariupol, Mykolaiv, Kherson region. So everywhere. If we talk about Lviv in particular, it was one of the biggest attacks so far. So as we know, for now there were 5 missiles fired at Russian missiles fired at Lviv. 4 of them reached the city. As we know, for now, 7 people are dead, 11 are injured. One of them is a child, and actually this child was evacuated from Kharkiv with his mother. So he was evacuated from Kharkiv and suffered all this in Lviv, unfortunately. What we know that 3 rockets reached the infrastructure near the train station, and 1 rocket reached directly the service of the car service company, the station. So this is a completely civilian asset in the city. If we talk about Kyiv, we had also a couple of shellings happening here, and for the moment, it's only military infrastructure that was injured, that was damaged, and no injuries. Some injuries we know from the recent shellings, but today's bombing caused no injuries for the moment.
Yeah, and this happening, when it's still really cold, I know in many of those parts. But over the weekend, also President Volodymyr Zelensky was defiant about Russia's ultimatum to Ukrainian soldiers in the city of Mariupol. He'd asked them to either surrender or prepare to die. Zelensky says Ukraine is not willing to give up territory in the eastern part of the country to end the war with Russia. But how is the resistance preparing to face off with Russian troops as we enter this new dimension of the war in Ukraine?
Ukrainian soldiers in Mariupol are showing a clearly heroic resistance. And I should say that the spirit that they show, the spirit of fighting until the very end, is the spirit of the whole country, is the spirit of the nation. So it's no surprise for Ukrainian nation and for Ukrainians that they decline to surrender. This is not an option at all. We all here in the country, everyone understands that the most horrific battle is yet to come. Everyone are getting ready for the battle in the Donbass, and it's already happening. The escalation is already started in Luhansk region and in Donetsk region, And unfortunately, today we had a lot of people dead and injured in those villages next to Kharkiv and in the area. Everyone understands that the worst is yet to come, because we all see the escalation in terms of the movements of Russian forces, and intelligence is also reporting on the huge number of troops which are getting ready to start the battle. At the same time, Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian government, Ukrainian society is definitely ready. I mean, of course, we don't know all the military information, but it looks like that everyone understands and everyone is getting ready, because Ukraine would not give up any territory, would not give up any centimeter of Ukrainian land. And what is important to understand that Ukrainian society is very angry, especially after all the revelations that we had in the cities and villages of Kyiv region, after what is happening in Mariupol, in Izum, in all these towns where people are suffering that much. So Ukrainian society would not even consider the government or soldiers to give up the territory.
And Anna, about Mariupol, Russia claimed to have taken control, even though that is being disputed. But are there fears that Russia is also going to try to seize Kyiv if it captures Donbass?
We don't have official information about capturing Mariupol, because, as we know, very active street fightings are happening at the moment. If we talk about Azovstal plant, which is basically the central point of resistance, and this is a place where more than 1,000 of civilians are hiding, including children and newborns. These places are under Ukrainian control, and there are heavy fighting going on. So I don't think that this is the correct information, at least for this point of time. Mariupol is under Ukrainian control. If we talk about Kyiv and Kyiv region, I don't really think that this is to be considered for the moment. It doesn't really look that Russia has enough forces to continue after Donbass battle, to continue, to go to Kyiv. It's definitely another huge battle. So for the moment, it doesn't look like they would have, resources to do so. But at the same time, Ukrainian government and people also are getting ready that this is a possibility. So everyone are expecting that something could happen, and this scenario could be the realistic scenario, because obviously no one knows how everything could turn. So in this term, everyone are ready. And as I know, the resistance is also at place and ready to fight in case it's needed. But again, in the nearest future, it doesn't seem so that this would be needed.
Right, and Anna, does Ukraine have mercenaries in the army? We heard or seeing a recent video emerging showing captured Britons asking for prisoner swap. Has President Zelensky spoken about this?
Not particularly comments on the British citizens to be swapped with Mr. Medvedchuk, but as what the wife of Mr. Medvedchuk is suggesting, and I guess this is the position of Russia as well. Today, Mr. Medvedchuk had his own speech, and he suggested that he could be swapped with the civilians and those who are injured in Mariupol. I mean, soldiers who are injured and civilians who are kept as hostages there. So I think this is a more realistic scenario in terms of swapping Mr. Medvedchuk, and probably for Ukraine, this would be the only option as well, because I don't think that Ukrainian government would consider to swap this person for only two people, even these are international citizens, foreigners.
Anna Chernikova, thank you for all your reporting you have been doing since we got to know you in Ukraine. We are praying for your safety. We know that this must be tough, trying to juggle where is safe and where is not in Ukraine. Thanks again for your reporting.
Thank you.
And pro-Russian Ukrainian politician Viktor Medvedchuk has appealed in a video released by Ukraine Security Service today, as Anna just pointed out, to be handed over to Moscow in a prison swap for Ukrainian forces and civilians trapped in the besieged city of Mariupol. Medvedchuk made the appeal to Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in a video published by the SBU Security Service on Facebook. It was unclear how freely Medvedchuk was speaking in the video, but he said he was making a plea for the Ukrainian side to exchange me for the defendants of Mariupol and its citizens who are there today and have no opportunity for a safe exit through a humanitarian corridor. His words. Medvedchuk is a leader of the opposition platform for Life Party. He's an ally of President Putin. He'd been placed under house arrest since last year for treason and terrorism financing charges, which he denies. He escaped a few days after the Russian invasion began in February and was later captured by Ukraine.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Western countries had scored an own goal by imposing sanctions against Russia over Ukraine, which he said had led to a deterioration of the economy in the West. Speaking on the state of Russia's domestic economy today, President Putin said that inflation was stabilizing and that retail demand in the country had normalized. Western countries have imposed unprecedented sanctions on Russia's corporate and financial system since it sent troops into Ukraine February 24 in what it calls a special military operation. Russia should use its budget to support the economy and liquidity in conditions of contracting lending activity, even though the central bank's rate cuts will make lending cheaper. This is coming from President Putin. He also spoke to top government officials via video link and said that Russia should speed up the process of using national currencies in foreign trade under the new conditions.
The U.S. risks pushing Ukraine to the brink of collapse by sending weapons and making empty promises in the current Russia-Ukraine conflict, coming from the people of Afghanistan who have witnessed firsthand the damaging effects of U.S. foreign policy interventions. In a recent interview, a political analyst, Abdul Jabbar Akbari, who was in Kabul, said he's concerned that the U.S. actions will inflict heavy pain on Ukraine, especially considering the level of suffering caused by the U.S. in Afghanistan over the past 2 decades. His remarks come after President Biden's administration on Wednesday promised to provide Ukraine with an additional $800 million worth of military aid due to what Washington anticipates will be a wider assault by Russia in eastern Ukraine. The U.S. has committed $1.7 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since Russia began this so-called special military operation on February 24th. But Barry says, in his own words, I think the U.S. will destroy Ukraine by sending heavy weapons. You can see what Afghanistan is like after the U.S. seized the country for 2 decades. It is the U.S. and some other countries that expanded the war in Afghanistan. It's the U.S. and some other countries that invaded Iraq, Syria, and more countries and launched wars there. The U.S. was in Afghanistan, which ended after a hasty pullout in late August 2021. In an operation lasting 20 years, causing more than 30,000 civilian deaths, leaving more than 60,000 people injured, and turning 11 million people into refugees. We have more coming up after the break, though, on The World Today. And into South Africa, where the military has deployed more than 10,000 troops to help relief and rescue operations following devastating floods in parts of KwaZulu-Natal province, with over 440 people dead. Stay with us.
Welcome back to The World Today, and we continue in South Africa, where the military says it is deploying more than 10,000 troops to help with relief and rescue operations following the devastating floods that swept through parts of KwaZulu-Natal province last week. More than 440 people have died, and the search is continuing for 63 people who are still missing. Some of them were swept away by swollen rivers and mudslides. The government has declared KwaZulu-Natal a disaster area.
Rescuers searched for dozens of people still missing in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province over the weekend. In a semi-rural area of Durban, 3 members of the Sibiya family were killed when the walls of the room where they slept collapsed. In the Durban area of Marine Hill, police used sniffer dogs to search through debris, and a military helicopter was deployed to help the rescue mission. Province's Premier, Shinle Zikalala, says the death toll has risen to 443, with a further 63 people unaccounted for. The floods have left thousands homeless, knocked out power and water services, and disrupted operations at one of Africa's busiest ports, Durban.
House been washed away very bad. People in the neighbor's house were buried in the sand. After digging the sand, they found them dead inside. And also a lot of accidents, plenty of accidents. It's a very, very sad thing. Big disaster. Roads are damaged, you can't come to work. You have to make alternative ways. Very bad, very bad.
The flood has affected our lives. Even in my home, the water came inside the house and the furniture, everything inside, that's broken by the floods. Yeah, we can't even go well on the road because the other bridges that's fallen down. And the way to go with the taxi is not available now to go. We have to change the way we're going.
A provincial economic official estimated the overall infrastructure damage at more than 10 billion rands. President Cyril Ramaphosa's office said late on Saturday he had delayed a working visit to Saudi Arabia to focus on the disaster. The rainfall in the region has since eased, but the amount of rain which fell last Monday was equal to about 75% of South Africa's average annual precipitation. Climate change activists are calling for investments to help communities around the world better prepare for worsening weather, as Africa's southeastern coast is expected to see more violent storms and floods in the coming decades.
Well, seeing that this is all due to climate change, possibly, Dr. John Osama, climate change expert, joins us now. He's in our Abuja studio. Thank you for joining us on the program, Dr. Osama.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And, we're imagining that this is what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal is as a result of climate change, but the immediate cause we can see is the floods that are as a result of heavy rains that have been on for several days in South Africa. So what are you blaming this on, you being the expert and you seeing the behind the scenes that we're not seeing?
Well, we've been predicting this for quite some time. What you're seeing now is a conglomeration of factors. We have to look at natural rainfall patterns in some of these areas, but we also have to factor in the impact of climate change. Climate change amplifies what is normal. We call it a threat multiplier in the sense that if you're having a lot of moisture in a particular area, you're going to have more. And the reason is simple. We have warmer temperatures. When you have warm ocean temperatures, sucking a lot of moisture into the atmosphere, eventually that moisture has to come down. And sometimes it comes down in a deluge. We're looking at this instance in South Africa. Within a 24-hour period, we had about 300 millimeters of rain, which is what you would typically have in a whole year, just within a 24-hour period. The ground is not ready to absorb that kind of water. Process of evaporation doesn't happen that quickly. So you're going to have flooding. And this is what we're saying in this particular region, Madagascar, South Africa. We're having a lot of cyclones, a lot of tornado activity because the ocean temperature is becoming warmer as a result of climate change. You're seeing record temperatures every year because of the accumulation of carbon and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So this is what we expect will be happening more frequently because the underlying factors are there. The other issue that I want to point out, another way that climate change is contributing to what we see, is that because of the warming temperatures, the Arctic Circle is melting. We have about 30 million square kilometers of ice. In the last 30 years, about half of that ice has melted. And all that is feeding a lot of water into the oceans. If you look at this particular region, it's right on the ocean. So the water level is already higher. So when you have this kind of rain, the water overflows its banks, and you're going to have a lot of flooding and mudslides.
Wow. So all of this information the government may have also had, because I know that, the weather ministries may have predicted, this terrible scenario that we're looking at, but some have also blamed people for building homes along, riverbanks, many precariously perched on the edge of the river. But in reality, no building should ever even have been erected in such a location. This happens everywhere, even here in Nigeria, where we're asking people to move from plains to higher ground. So who's to blame here, for what's going on, apart from knowing that this is climate change, this is nature, cannot be stopped? Do we blame the people for, settling in those areas, or do we blame the government for not stopping people from settling in those areas?
It's a combination of factors, because in a lot of instances, people have been warned that you're going to have constant flooding. You're going to have perennial flooding in some of these coastal areas. Right here in Nigeria, we have people living on the banks of River Benue, River Niger, people in the Lokoja axis, and these people have seen for many years now that there's a tendency for those areas to flood. So in some instances, people are not heeding the warning that government is putting out. But we also have to look at government. In a lot of the instances, you find that the building codes are not being enforced. The permits to build in some of these areas are not being enforced. And people build where they shouldn't be building. And even when officials see that the regime to demolish those buildings is not very effective. So you have a combination of factors. The other issue that I want to point out, in some cases you find that there are dams upstream from where these floods are happening. And because of government's inability to desilt the dams the way that they should, the frequency that they ought to be desilting them, you find that the dams will overflow and people downstream will end up being washed away. So it's a combination of factors. People need to heed warnings. I have a particular anecdote that is very poignant. I remember after we had a flood in Nigeria here, I was passing through Lokoja, and I saw a group of men sitting in front of their compound, in front of the house, playing draft, laughing, joking. And then you look above their heads, almost up to the rooftop, you could see the watermark where the flood had been just a month before. That whole area was submerged. But within a month, they were back, sitting right in front of the flood line. You could see the stain on the wall. So that tells you the mindset that we have in some of these areas. So people need to be helped to move. Government has an overriding interest in protecting lives and property. In the U.S., sometimes we forcibly relocate these people to areas that are safe because, as you've seen, it costs a lot of money, a lot of anguish for government to get involved in search and rescue efforts, in recovery efforts. We still have a lot of people missing. So we all have a role to play in this.
And Dr. Soma, most times, it really is their home, and so they really can't think about any other place other than, there. But you've mentioned the rain patterns, and you've also talked about climate change and the changing environment, or we say weather and climates, depending on the difference. But is it possible to keep up, for government to keep up with climate change?
Yes, it is. I think the quantum of knowledge that we have now is tremendous. Going back 10 years ago when I was talking about these things, people were looking at me like an alien from the moon. But I think everybody knows what climate change is. Everybody has a sense, some general sense of what climate change is. It generally means that the climate that we're used to is changing, and usually for the worse. We're seeing heat waves, we're seeing droughts, we're seeing desertification, we're seeing flooding, we're seeing heavy precipitation in some areas. We are seeing species loss. We are seeing a lot of vector diseases. Even COVID-19 in some way can be related to climate change because we are disrupting the ecosystem where some of these vectors used to live. So I think government understands. This government just passed an act, Climate Change Act. We are also contributing to the Paris Climate Change nationally determined contributions. So I think government is aware. The issue for me is always the enforcement and the political will to make things happen. We are making pledges. We said net zero by 2060. I think we can achieve net zero by 2040 if we really make some changes in the way we generate our electricity, in the way we consume energy, in the way we move people in mass transit, in the way we cook in our homes, and in the way we manage our environment. So government is aware. And I think people are also becoming aware that climate change is here to stay, and in most cases, it is detrimental to our livelihoods.
But there are still some that do not agree that climate change exists, and some of them are also still in government. But if we come back to Nigeria, NIMET has predicted a prolonged rainy season for Cross River, Imo, Plateau, Kano, Bauchi, and Yobe states, warning of the imminence of little dry seasons for states like Lagos, Oyo, Osun, and Ekiti State. Break this down for us, these two periods.
NIMET is the agency charged with making predictions. They have a lot of highly advanced equipment that they use to measure and project what will happen. And by and large, NIMET has been largely correct in those predictions. So what states and individuals are supposed to do is to look at the NIMET prediction and be able to tailor their behavior, tailor their policies to what NIMET is predicting. In this particular instance, we're already seeing that this is going to be a heavy rainfall season. In Abuja here, we've had, even today, we've had some rain in Abuja, and we've had a few spells of rain just this month. So people need to look at particularly people in government, look at the NIMET prediction, take it very seriously and mainstream it into what you're doing within your state. The good news is that much of what NIMET is saying, they've been saying for the past 10 years. So any state that is proactive and that truly cares about taking action, they have a quantum of information that they can rely on. Going up in the northern part of the country, we also have to be careful because desertification, which is also a symptom of climate change, is eating most of the land in the north. A lot of the frontline states in the north are severely threatened. Desertification is coming at about a rate of 3.5 kilometers every year. It's making the ground very arid. Much of what we attribute to herdsmen, farmers' clashes can be traced to climate change because that whole region is drying up. There's not enough water. There's not enough grass for about 20 million cattle in Nigeria to graze. So they are forced to come southward, looking for grass and water. So those are issues that are here. So those who are still skeptical about climate change, I tell them it's already staring you in the face. We talk about weather variability. You used to have a clear delineation between rainy season and dry season. Now we don't have that anymore. And it's confusing a lot of farmers. They will rush out, plant their crops, plant their seedlings, and then the rain stops and the whole thing dries up. And in some cases, they don't have a backup to do it again. So we are right in the brunt of climate change, and we need to adapt, and we need to take steps to mitigate what we're seeing.
Thank you, Dr. Jonas. So we still have, more questions to ask, especially as, the world faces a food shortage, all thanks to the war in Ukraine. And now with, weather conditions just going crazy, thoughts are on, how much we're able to produce this year. Thank you again for speaking with us on The World Today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We're in Somalia now, where the country is facing its most severe drought in over 3 decades, with more than half the population in dire need of food and water.
The United Nations said earlier this month that parts of the country could soon plunge into famine. It estimates 7.7 million people, or more than half of the population, are facing severe hunger or starvation this year.
Dead livestock, malnourished children, and a constant call for help has become the norm in Somalia as a severe drought ravages the Horn of Africa nation. Located in the southern federal member state of Jubaland, Dalo has been hard hit by Somalia's current wave of drought. 3 IDP camps have sprung up since November 2021 alone due to an influx of newly arrived IDPs. With close to 3 million people already internally displaced by previous droughts and conflicts, Somalia is now forced to contend with more displacements amid shrinking donor aid to redeem the situation.
The resources are not anywhere near enough. Everywhere you go, look at these people behind me. All of them are new arrivals. 400 families arrived in the past 2 weeks alone in this single IDP camp. And there are many around Dolo.
The country is facing the risk of famine as a combination of poor rainfall, skyrocketing food prices, and huge funding shortfalls, leaving almost 40% of Somalis, around 6 million people, facing critical levels of food insecurity.
We cannot really overemphasize the fact that the drought situation is getting worse, and we're actually moving from a drought response now into a prevention of famine. So it is getting more intense, it is getting more severe, it's getting more acute. And of course, all of the indicators are that this situation will get a little bit more severe because, one, we are expecting probably the 4th failed rain season.
Children under 5 are amongst the most vulnerable as the drought worsens and access to food and milk is very scarce. According to the UN, around 1.4 million children face acute malnutrition through the end of this year, with around a quarter of them, or 330,000 children, facing severe acute malnutrition.
Funding's everything. I mean, we have the expertise, we have the people, we have the communities who do it for themselves, but what they need are the supplies. So the money is for the supplies. It's for plumpy nut, it's for, in severe cases, special milk for severely malnourished. You need the chlorine tablets. You need to truck the water. You need all of those things. We need recreation kits for children. They need to play. They need to have a childhood.
The war in Ukraine is also having an impact on the situation in Somalia. Previously, up to 85% of Somalia's wheat imports came from Russia and Ukraine. That has stopped, leading to price increases of 160% in just 1 month.
I know that the world is very much occupied by Ukraine, but human suffering is human suffering, no matter whether in Europe or Asia or Africa. And here we have to uplift, to live to our moral values. And our moral values, humanity matters. If we are not responding now, and we are not increase our response, those people will be heading to famine. And that is not acceptable.
Weather forecasts are predicting an average to below average rainy season for Somalia. More than 80% of the country has remained generally dry, and water and staple food prices have experienced dramatic price hikes. The United Nations says if the funding gap is not urgently addressed, it will contribute to worse outcomes with the real risk of widespread famine. The last time such a humanitarian tragedy struck Somalia was in 2011, when famine conditions killed 250,000 people.
Still ahead on the program. It's the kebab that almost made it into space. We'll tell you more when we return.
Welcome back to The World Today. Sri Lanka's President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has announced 17 new ministerial appointments, but notably left out some members of his own family in the wake of protests over the government's handling of a devastating economic crisis. In a speech to his new cabinet, President Rajapaksa said he would seek solutions to Sri Lanka's problems, including via possible constitutional changes, according to a statement from his office. He said to reporters there, I stand ready to support Parliament on constitutional changes that should be made. I believe that we should have gone for a program with the International Monetary Fund earlier. He said today people are under an immense pressure due to this economic crisis. I deeply regret this situation. A nation of 22 million people is experiencing prolonged power cuts and fuel and medicine shortages triggered by a tumble in its foreign exchange reserves that has stalled imports of essentials, leading to daily protests in the commercial capital, Colombo.
Staying with Sri Lanka, it's day 2 of the 3-day march, which began Sunday. Hundreds of supporters of the opposition National People's Power Party on a 57-kilometre march from the southern city of Beruwala to Sri Lanka's commercial capital, Colombo, protesting against the government's handling of a devastating economic crisis. Demonstrations have raged across the country for weeks as people angered by prolonged power cuts, medicine shortage, medicine demand, and also the demand for President Rajapaksa's resignation. In a New Year's message Thursday, Rajapaksa said the current crisis was the biggest challenge the country had faced in recent years. Earlier this week, Sri Lanka said it would suspend repayment of external debts ahead of negotiations with IMF. And this is for a loan program, instead using its little foreign reserves to provide essentials to its people. Besides the shortages, Sri Lankans are also struggling with rocketing inflation that has hit middle-class families.
China has reported the deaths of 3 people from COVID in Shanghai for the first time since the financial hub entered lockdown in late March. A release from the City Health Commission said the victims were aged between 89 and 91 and were unvaccinated. Shanghai officials said only 38% of residents over 60 are fully vaccinated. The city is now due to enter another round of mass testing, which means a strict lockdown will continue into a 4th week for most residents. Residents were seen being tested earlier today within residential compounds for COVID-19. The financial hub has set a target to stop the spread of COVID-19 outside of quarantined areas by Wednesday this week. 2 people familiar with the matter saying that this would allow the city to further ease its lockdown and start returning to normal life as public frustrations grow. It's reported over 19,000 new daily asymptomatic COVID-19 cases, 3 deaths as of April 17th. That's the first time during the current outbreak the fatalities were recorded among COVID patients. Until now, China has maintained no one died of COVID in the city, a claim that is increasingly come into question.
Well, staying with the coronavirus, according to U.S. Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, in an interview, the United States will lose millions of doses of COVID-19 vaccine that will expire if the Congress does not approve additional funding for COVID-19 relief. U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has recently said new money for global vaccination will have to wait until later in the spring because the Senate couldn't come to an agreement. There are still more than 3,000 people around the world dying from COVID-19 each day, with a new variant coming out roughly every 4 months. Kuhn said he was so disappointed that, quote, we in Congress could not come together and deliver critically needed global help to deliver the vaccines that we've already invented, developed and purchased, and to make sure that the nearly 3 billion people around the world who haven't yet had a single vaccine dose get some protection against this pandemic. According to The Hill, the U.S. Senate was stuck in a fight over supplemental funding for COVID-19 relief. Senate Republicans and Democrats reached a deal on April the 4th on $10 billion in additional COVID funding to buy therapeutics and vaccines and maintain the nation's testing capacity if another COVID wave hits the United States. However, some Republicans are demanding a vote on an amendment to reinstate Title 42, Trump-era border restriction that authorized U.S. border officials to swiftly expel migrants in order to stop the spread of the disease as a condition for supporting additional funding. Well, Coons has argued that the two should not be tied together. The policy was introduced after the COVID-19 outbreak in 2020 by then Republican President Donald Trump's administration and has reportedly been used roughly 1.7 million times by the current federal authorities.
Our Christians around the world celebrated Easter this week, and thousands of Jewish worshippers prayed at the Western Wall at a special mass priestly blessing, which takes place during the holiday of Passover under heavy Israeli security following recent violence in Jerusalem. Hundreds of police deployed across Jerusalem and its old city after violence at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, which erupted on Friday, raised fears about a slide back into deeper conflict. Tensions were high in Jerusalem, Israel, and the occupied Palestinian territories in recent weeks, as this year, the holy month of Ramadan, coincides with the Jewish festival of Passover. But this Passover, thousands of Jews were able to go back to the holy site after more than 2 years of COVID-19 restrictions reduced the number of worshippers to hundreds and sometimes dozens. A prayer is still split into two separate events to allow for more people to attend, but there are no COVID-19 restrictions on site. The Western Wall Heritage Foundation has mentioned this. Prayers will also be held on Wednesday morning. The priestly blessing is carried out by members of the Jewish priestly caste known as Kohanim, beg your pardon, in Hebrew. It's thought to be descended from the line of biblical Aaron and are often referred to as Jewish priests because of their prominent role in worship in Judaism's ancient temples in Jerusalem.
Thank God today it's very crowded here. All the Jews are coming from all over Israel, and some people overseas came here. Although the situation, they think the situation is a little bit tight, but people believe that this is our place and they have faith in God, in the Lord, and they came here to pray and to say thank you on everything, that the corona is leaving us, and we pray for good health, for good year, and we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we thank our Lord for everything. So the nation of Israel is strong. Don't worry, Am Yisrael Chai.
We're back in China, where the first national botanical garden was officially inaugurated in Beijing today as a major venue to strengthen the ex-situ conservation of endangered plant species. With a planned area of nearly 600 hectares, the botanical garden is built based on the resources from the Institute of Botany at the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Beijing Botanical Garden. According to the executive director of the garden, it's a concrete action to promote the harmony between man and nature at the national level, strengthen the protection of biodiversity, and implement the Convention on Biological Diversity. China is currently fostering a national system of nature reserves for the Institute Conservation of Wildlife and a national system of botanical gardens for ex-situ conservation.
Well, as we end the program, a restaurant owner and kebab enthusiast in Turkish city of Adana decided to mark the 61st anniversary of the first human space flight by attempting to send that spicy kebab into space. This was on Saturday. Restaurateur Yasser Aydin and a small crew of local entrepreneurs fixed a pipe kebab onto a styrofoam tray attached to a special box designed to endure extreme conditions found high above the Earth's surface. A box held a tracking device and a camera so that the crew was able to follow the kebab's progress. There it is. The box and the kebab tray were launched up into the Earth's atmosphere from Adana, lifted by a large helium balloon. But after flying for 3 hours at an altitude of 35 to 40 kilometers, the kebab-laden balloon burst and fell into the sea off the coast of Turkey's Hatay province from the launch site. The kebab was found largely intact, thank God, in water after its short flight.
What a kebab.
Yeah, I think it did make it, to the edge of the Earth's atmosphere.
I don't think it did.
Outer space kebab.
3 hours, I don't think so.
I wonder if it tasted the same.
I wonder if they ate it.
Maybe they ate it. Or they could have kept it or preserved it. Well, that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
Enjoy your evening.